When my father texted me, "You're a parasite. $500 a month or get out," I felt something inside me snap, but I still kept quiet. That message was the final thread pulling at the frayed edges of my patience. I stared at my phone, the cold blue light reflecting the ache in my chest. The living room around me was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the ticking clock on the wall. It was Robert's house, or at least, it was now my reluctant refuge after losing everything. I didn't expect kindness from him. I never had. But I did expect, maybe, a shred of respect. Instead, I was just his disappointment, the failed daughter who hadn't lived up to the family name. The same name that had elevated my older brother Brandon to a pedestal I was never allowed near. That night, I sat on the worn-out sofa in the corner of his sprawling mansion, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. The smell of his cologne still lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the faint scent of old leather and polished wood. I could hear his footsteps pacing in the hallway outside, each step a reminder of the invisible chains tying me to this humiliating situation. It wasn't always like this. Before everything fell apart, I was an independent woman, working hard at a modest marketing firm in the city. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had my own little apartment with creaky floors and a window that let in the soft hum of the morning traffic. I liked waking up to the smell of burnt toast and the distant chirping of birds. Small things, but they were mine. My dad? He was a titan in the business world, the kind of man who could silence a room just by walking in. Robert Bennett. The name itself carried weight. And then there was Brandon, my older brother, the golden child. Always perfect, always successful, always the one Dad bragged about at every family gathering. I remember one Sunday afternoon, not too long ago, sitting at the kitchen table with Mom, her voice low and tired. "Chloe, you need to try harder. Your father's disappointed you're not Brandon." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, but I was tired. Tired of living in the shadow of a brother who never seemed to notice me. Tired of chasing a version of success that didn't feel like mine. The day I got the pink slip from my job was a blur. The office smelled like stale coffee and old paper. The chatter around me dimmed to a hum as I packed my desk. The uncertainty was suffocating. But what came next was worse. The text from Dad. The cold, ruthless words. I had no home to go to. No safety net except the one my father grudgingly provided on his terms. His sofa was my new prison. Those first few weeks were a daily struggle. Dad's eyes were knives, slicing through any shred of confidence I tried to hold on to. "You're lucky I'm letting you stay here," he snapped one morning, the bitterness dripping from his voice like venom. "Brandon's already on his 3rd vacation this year, and you can't even pay rent." I nodded silently, the sting of humiliation burning my cheeks. I tried to stay invisible, tiptoeing through his house, avoiding his gaze, hoping to outlast the storm. But the worst was the comparisons. Every conversation, every interaction, was a reminder that I wasn't enough. One evening, after a particularly harsh exchange, I retreated to my small corner, the sofa cushions flattened from too many restless nights. I scrolled through my phone aimlessly until an ad popped up, a lottery jackpot nearing $12 million. Something in me laughed bitterly. It felt like a cruel joke. Me? Winning the lottery? The universe must be messing with me. But fate had other plans. Weeks later, I barely noticed the text messages stacking up from my father, all demanding rent, all laced with contempt. Then came that final brutal one. "You're a parasite. $500 a month, or get out." Something inside me cracked. But instead of fighting back, I made a decision. A quiet, powerful decision. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to live in his shadow or on his terms. I would take back my life silently, with strength he couldn't see coming. The next morning, I paid the rent, all $500, without a word. Then I packed my things and left, closing the door behind me with a sense of quiet triumph. I was free. That night, as I watched the news in my new, modest apartment, the screen flashed with a headline. "Local woman wins $12 million lottery jackpot." There I was, smiling shyly, the face of a story no one had expected. I should have felt relief, happiness even. But instead, a knot tightened in my stomach. I knew this would change everything, especially with Dad. Days later, the storm hit. I received a summons. My father was suing me, claiming the money was his because I'd been living under his roof, claiming entitlement, claiming everything but the truth. I sat at my kitchen table, the legal papers cold and sterile under the soft glow of my lamp. My hands trembled as I read the accusations, the cruelty dressed up in lawyers' words. But I wasn't alone anymore. Marcus Reynolds was my lawyer, steady, calm, and unwavering. A man who saw me not as a failure but as a fighter. He listened to my story with quiet intensity, promising he'd help me put Dad's cruelty on the record. In court, the tension was thick. The judge's eyes scanned the text messages Marcus presented my father's cruel words, the callous demands, the bitterness laid bare for all to see. "You are not a victim," the judge declared, dismissing Dad's claim. "You are entitled to your own life and your own winnings." And just like that, the scales tipped. I sat back, the weight lifting off my chest. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about setting boundaries, about standing up to the people who try to keep you small. My father didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. But I didn't need that anymore. The courtroom emptied slowly, whispers filling the wood-paneled room like a low tide retreating. I sat frozen in my chair, the echo of the judge's words still ringing in my ears. "You are not a victim." It was more than just a legal ruling. It was a lifeline. Marcus glanced at me with a small, reassuring smile. "You did good, Chloe. You stood your ground." I nodded. But inside, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. For years, I had been running on fumes, trying to prove myself to a father who never seemed to want me. Now, for the first time, I realized I was enough. Without apology, without compromise. Life after the court case wasn't an instant fairy tale. It was quiet, awkward, and above all, new. I found myself waking up each morning without the dread that had been a constant companion for months. The apartment was small but warm, the morning sun filtering softly through thin curtains, casting gentle patterns on the kitchen tiles. I brewed coffee this time. It didn't taste like defeat. It tasted like possibility. I began to rebuild slowly, not just the physical walls around me, but the walls inside, too. Walls that no longer allowed toxicity in. My father's calls stopped after the lawsuit was dismissed. I wasn't sure if it was anger or shame, maybe both, but silence became a strange kind of peace. Brandon didn't reach out either. I guess some family ties are frayed beyond repair. Yet, despite the isolation, I felt a strange freedom in being alone. I started volunteering at a community center, helping women who, like me, had been through tough times. Their stories were different, but the pain was familiar, the sting of rejection, the ache of invisibility. It reminded me that strength often comes in quiet moments of resilience, not in grand gestures. One afternoon, as I was sorting donations in the sunlit hall, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Chloe," it read. "This is Robert. I want to meet. No lawyers. Just us." My heart thudded in my chest, anger, confusion, and a flicker of something I wasn't ready to name. For a long moment, I stared at the screen. Then, I typed back simply, "Not now." And I put the phone down. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a boundary. For years, I had bent and broken trying to meet his impossible standards. But now, I was learning something new. Love doesn't come with chains. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. I wanted to live a life defined not by my father's approval, but by my own truth. In those quiet months, I started to dream again. Not the kind of dreams painted by someone else's expectations, but my own. I enrolled in evening classes marketing, but this time, with a focus on digital and social media. I was slow at first, fumbling with new technology and unfamiliar terms. But every small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I made new friends, people who saw me, really saw me. Not as the failed daughter or the lottery winner, but as Chloe. Sometimes, when the night was especially quiet, I would think back to that sofa in my father's house, the cold cushions, the stifling air, the weight of his gaze, and I would shiver. But then I would remind myself how far I'd come, how a girl who once felt invisible had found a way to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock her down. The real victory wasn't the money. It was the courage to walk away, to say no, and to build something new. And that is a lesson I want to share with anyone who's ever been made to feel small or worthless by the people who should love them most. Your worth isn't defined by others. Your strength lies in the boundaries you set, and the love you give yourself. It's strange how silence can be both comforting and haunting. After I turned down my father's text, days stretched into weeks, with no word from him. No phone calls, no emails, no messages, just an empty space where conflict once lived. At first, I welcomed it like fresh air. But as the quiet deepened, I found myself wrestling with a stubborn ache, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd reach out differently. Maybe he'd say he was sorry. But that was wishful thinking. I remember one night in particular. The rain was tapping steadily against the window, a soft percussion in the otherwise still apartment. I sat curled on the couch, the fabric worn but familiar, a blanket draped loosely over my knees. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through old messages from Dad, the ones filled with insults, comparisons, and bitter demands. "You're a parasite. $500 a month or get out." The words felt like poison, but they also reminded me of how far I'd come. The loneliness that crept in wasn't because of losing my father, it was because of losing the hope for a father's love. That week, I got a call from my brother, Brandon. "Chloe," he said, his voice careful, like he was tiptoeing around a minefield. "Dad's been talking about you. A lot." I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the phone. "What kind of talking?" "Not good. He's upset about the lawsuit. Says you're tearing the family apart." I swallowed hard, the familiar sting of disappointment surfacing. "I'm not the one who sued him, Brandon. He sued me." There was a long pause. "I know. I'm just saying, families get messy." I didn't know what to say, because messy was putting it lightly. The truth was, I didn't want to be part of a family that saw me as a problem or a dollar sign. Not after everything. But family, or what was left of it, still lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. One afternoon, I was at a cafe, the smell of roasted coffee beans wrapping around me like a warm hug. I was drafting a blog post about my journey, the ups and downs, the moments of strength and vulnerability. Writing had become my therapy, my way to process the chaos inside. A young woman sitting nearby glanced over, her eyes kind. "You have a story," she said softly. "I can see it." I smiled, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I guess I do." She nodded. "You're brave for sharing it." It was a small moment, but it meant the world. I started to receive messages from strangers who had watched the news, heard about my case, or read my posts online. Women who told me their own stories of toxic families, heartbreak, and healing. It made me realize how many people were walking the same hard path, and how important it was to speak up not just for myself, but for others. Meanwhile, Dad's attempts to keep control fizzled. He tried a few more texts, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits. Marcus, my lawyer, handled them swiftly, each time reminding me that I didn't owe my father anything, not apologies, not money, not respect he hadn't earned. It was liberating, in a way, to see him reduced to empty threats. There was one final confrontation, not in court, not in a text, but in a chance encounter. I was at a grocery store, picking out apples, when I saw him, Dad. His sharp suit felt out of place in the aisles of fresh produce. Our eyes met, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us. "Chloe," he said, voice low. "You're doing well. Inotet. Thank you." No apologies. No bitterness. Just two people who had chosen different paths. That night, I sat by my window, the city lights sparkling like distant stars. The air smelled of rain and fresh earth. I thought about the journey, the pain, the resilience, the unexpected grace. And I realized something. Healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, complicated, and slow. But it's possible. The morning light filtered softly through my curtains as I sat at my kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea warming my hands. It had been months since I'd left my father's house, and every day still felt like a quiet victory. But even with the court behind me and the lottery winning safely in my account, I knew the real battle wasn't about money. It was about freedom. Freedom from expectations that weren't mine. Freedom from words that cut deeper than any blade. Freedom from living someone else's story. I started putting more energy into building my life on my terms. I took the classes seriously, juggling late nights, studying with early mornings, volunteering. The smell of fresh printer ink, the clatter of keyboards, even the soft murmur of my classmates' conversations became part of a new, hopeful rhythm. Slowly, I began piecing together a future where I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Then came a surprise, a call from Marcus. "Chloe, there's a settlement offer from your father's side," he said carefully. My heart pounded. I'd hoped this chapter was closed. "What kind of offer?" I asked. "Nothing major. Just a small amount probably to keep this quiet." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to accept, to stop the back and forth. But I knew better. "Tell him no," I said firmly. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about respect." That decision felt like a turning point. I was no longer a victim waiting for approval. I was a woman setting boundaries, defining her own worth. There were still days when I doubted myself, when loneliness crept in, or the weight of the past threatened to pull me under. But then I'd remember the texts, the insults, the cold sofa, and I'd find strength in knowing I had walked away. I began to document my journey in more detail, writing about the sting of rejection, the struggle to rebuild, and the power of self-love. The words resonated, and soon my blog grew into a small but supportive community of people finding their own way through family pain. One evening, after a long day, I received a message that surprised me. It was from my mother. "I'm proud of you, Chloe," she wrote. "Keep shining." Tears filled my eyes. My mother had always been caught in the middle, a silent witness to the storm. Her words were a balm, a reminder that love could still exist, even in broken places. That night, I sat by the window, the cool breeze carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was healing a heart. The more I built my life away from my father's shadow, the more I understood how toxic those years had been. Not because of the money or the lawsuit, but because of the constant erosion of self-worth. It's subtle at first, a cutting comment disguised as concern, a look of disappointment that lingers longer than it should. Over time, those small cuts bleed into something much deeper. I remember one evening, sitting in my apartment, the scent of fresh jasmine still lingering from the open window. I caught myself flinching at the sound of my phone buzzing. It was an unknown number, but my heart sank, expecting another text from Dad or someone connected to him. Instead, it was a woman's voice on the other end. "Hi, Chloe. My name's Rachel. I've been following your blog, and I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it's helped me see my own." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. "That means a lot," I whispered. That moment crystallized something important. My pain wasn't just my own. It belonged to so many others who felt trapped by family expectations or cruelty. For the first time, my story felt like it had a purpose beyond the courtroom or the headlines. But the healing wasn't linear. One afternoon, I was at a small art gallery opening, surrounded by friends I'd made through my volunteering work. The room smelled of paint and polished wood. The soft chatter and clinking glasses felt warm and alive. Yet, despite the comfort, I felt a sudden tightness in my chest when someone mentioned family. I realized that while I distanced myself from my father, the wound still lingered. That night, I sat alone with a journal, writing down every feeling I'd shoved away for years. The disappointment, the anger, the loneliness, but also the hope, the growth, the resilience. Writing was a kind of therapy, a way to confront the past without letting it control me. Then, a surprising invitation arrived. A local women's group asked me to speak about my experience with family boundaries and toxic relationships. I was terrified at first, standing in front of strangers, sharing my story out loud. But when the day came, I found strength in the faces looking back at me. Women nodding, some wiping tears, others smiling with recognition. I spoke about setting boundaries, about self-worth, about finding the courage to say no. And when I finished, the applause wasn't just for me. It was for every person in that room fighting their own battles. After the talk, a woman approached me quietly. "Your story saved me," she said softly. "Thank you." I felt something break open inside, the realization that my journey, painful as it had been, was creating ripples far beyond what I'd imagined. That evening, as I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I had survived. I had thrived. And most importantly, I had reclaimed my story. News travels fast in small communities, and before long, my story was no longer just mine. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers knew about the lawsuit, the lottery win, and the bitter clash with my father. At first, I was anxious, afraid of judgment, whispers behind my back, maybe even pity. But something unexpected happened. People reached out. One afternoon, I received an invitation to a local community panel on family dynamics and toxic relationships. They wanted me to share my story and talk about the importance of boundaries and self-respect. I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength, and the thought of reliving the pain in front of others made my chest tighten. But I knew this was important not just for me, but for anyone stuck in similar situations. The day of the panel, the community center was filled with a diverse group, women and men, young and old, all seeking answers or healing. I sat in the front row, heart pounding, as the moderator introduced me. When my turn came, I stepped up to the microphone, my voice steady but gentle. "I want to start by saying this isn't just my story," I began. "It's the story of many people who feel trapped by family expectations, by people who should love them unconditionally but instead try to control or diminish them." I spoke about my father's constant belittling, the lawsuit, and the moment I decided to walk away, I realized that true strength isn't in holding on to toxic relationships out of obligation, I said. "It's in setting boundaries. It's in choosing yourself." After the panel, several attendees approached me, sharing their own experiences. One woman hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for giving me permission to say no." Meanwhile, my father's reputation in the community was quietly shifting. His attempt to claim my winnings and sue me wasn't seen as a victim's plight, but as a desperate grasp at control. The judgment from the court was known to many, and whispers of his harshness grew louder. While he refused to apologize, the social consequences were clear. Despite all this, I chose not to harbor bitterness. I understood that my father's cruelty came from his own fears and insecurities. That didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me find compassion without sacrificing my boundaries. One evening, sitting on my apartment balcony, I looked out over the city lights shimmering in the distance. I thought about the journey, the betrayal, the fight, the healing. And I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the strength to walk away, for the courage to rebuild, for the wisdom to know when to say no. Rebuilding a life after the kind of heartbreak I experienced wasn't a tidy process. It wasn't like the movies, where you get a grand gesture or a sudden realization and everything just falls into place. No, healing was quiet, slow, sometimes messy. But it was mine. I started waking up each day without the dread that had haunted me for years. The mornings were softer now, the smell of fresh coffee, the gentle hum of city life outside my window, the way the light filtered through the curtains like a warm embrace. It felt like freedom. I found a job, not the high-powered marketing executive my father expected, but something honest and fulfilling, helping small businesses with their digital presence. It was different, but it gave me purpose. And I surrounded myself with people who lifted me up. Friends who really saw me for who I was. There were still hard days, of course. Days when memories of my father's harsh words crept back in, when the loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. But I learned to sit with those feelings without letting them define me. One evening, I received a package in the mail, a simple box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, a journal filled with quotes about strength, resilience, and self-love. There was a note, unsigned, for the girl who found her voice. I didn't know who sent it, but it felt like a message from the universe, a reminder that I wasn't alone. With time, I even found peace with my father's absence. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing his behavior, but about freeing myself from the bitterness that weighed me down. I wasn't sure if we'd ever have a real relationship, but I was okay with that, because I had found something far more important: my own worth. Sitting here now, writing this, I think about all the people out there trapped in toxic family dynamics, made to feel small or worthless. I want you to know this. You are not alone. You are worthy of respect, love, and kindness. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to share, but I believe there's power in honesty, especially when it comes to family, love, and boundaries. Have you ever felt like you had to shrink yourself just to keep the peace? Or been in a place where the people who should support you instead make you question your worth? If so, you're not alone. Sometimes, the hardest part is saying no to the pain, to the expectations, to people who don't see your value. But in doing so, you give yourself the chance to heal and grow. I hope my story encourages you to set those boundaries, to stand up for yourself, and to know that your worth isn't tied to anyone else's approval. Would you have done what I did? Would you have stayed silent? Or walked away? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing and supporting the channel for more real stories about family, struggle, and strength. Remember, your story matters, and so do you.